Yeah, we're back again to talk about what you just had to witness yesterday, which was not the greatest of things in the world, it's fair to say, and arguably one of the most predictable things we could ever witness as Arsenal fans. But we're going to talk about it, we're going to look ahead, we're going to try to think positively, although it might be a bit of a challenge. But we like them at TGT, so let's crack on with it. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys for another show, for another episode of our TGT podcast. I'm joined by three very good guests this evening. First of all, right-hand man Drew, back again. Good to see you, sir. Well, as always.
Yeah, good. Thanks for having me, as always. Hi, guys in the chat.
In new surroundings as well. Do you want to just quickly explain that you are elsewhere?
Yeah, I am indeed elsewhere. I'm migrated. I am further south than I was before. I'm in North Carolina now.
There you go. No longer a New Yorker, only blood-wise.
There's a lot of New Yorkers actually around here. Like the last 3-5 years, a lot of them have jumped ship like I did, so it's not too terrible. Yeah, from the price gouges of everything. So
yes. From living near London and working in London at times, yes, I know the prices of living in big cities. But no, it's good to have you back, mate, and I'm sure I look forward to debating a couple of points for you in a bit, but we'll get on to that. Of course. And back again for a second podcast, it's Johnny. How you doing, mate? Are you well?
I am very well, yeah. Thanks for having me back on. Well, I mean, I'm as well as can be. Obviously, yesterday didn't go the way that anyone really wanted that to go down. But as I say, we'll obviously jump on to talking about that more. But in general... I'm not doing too bad, really. Not too bad. I did go to the dentist today, though, and I'm being told I've got a root canal waiting for me. So,
oh God,
yeah. As I say, I'm doing kind of okay, but the news is kind of catching up with me at the moment. We've been done in North London Derby, and now I've got root canal. So let's try and cheer up. Christmas Day.
I don't know if I should say this live on air, but I managed to trick my dentist using the pandemic, whereby you go for your checkup, and then when they do a checkup, they're like, do you want like a clean? And obviously that clean costs like an extra 50 quid to do. And they were like, we'll do your top half today, and then next time we'll do the bottom half, in like a week's time. Within that week's time, lockdown happened. And I didn't have to pay for that clean until the next one. So what I'm hoping is when I go back and they say, well, it's been 6 months to a year now, we're going to do a clean again, I won't have to pay for that first one, and I got it for free. So that's maybe what I'm looking for.
Quite possible, yeah. And your dentist is probably listening in now going, I'm definitely getting that geezer to pay.
Yes, because clearly my dentist is a huge Gooner Talk fan.
No doubt. They all are.
Who knows? We are expecting a third guest. We have witnessed French's presence. He's just having a couple of connection issues and he should be back very, very soon. Hello, chat box. Thank you ever so much for tuning in. I'm well aware that your Monday evenings of Arsenal content is very busy with podcasts, so I appreciate you choosing to come on and jump on with us live. I'm expecting to get a lot more of you a little bit later on as other ones finish. But thank you ever so much for tuning in. Danny, the GFP from ABW, thank you for signing up as a member, mate. Absolute pleasure to have you on board. But we'll get through some of your comments and questions in a little bit after I've got the guys' initial, I was going to say positive thoughts, but I just remembered what the result was at the weekend. Johnny, I'm going to come back and start with you first, mate. We kind of had a little bit of chat off air about kind of our feelings, but ultimately you did kind of say the words you saw it coming, and what you saw coming did happen.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a tough week, really. And so the last time I was on the Gooner Talk, we were talking about Arteta. Obviously, this has been going on for a little while now, and I said that the notion of Arteta out was starting to seep into the the public consciousness with regards to fans online. And for me, when analysing where we're at right now, it's not really about Arteta out, but I don't know who could argue for Arteta in anymore. Now, what I mean by that is what I didn't want to say a couple of weeks ago or whatever was that I think we needed to raise the level of emergency or the sense of emergency within the squad and put the kind of burner under Arteta's bum a little bit, because I almost got a sense of complacency in the sense that the way that we were setting up for games week after week, there was nothing changing. And I don't mind you not having the total answer for how we move forward as a team and a squad. Like off the back, it's his first job, you know. But what I can't tolerate is us doing the same thing over and over again every single week and expecting positive results. It's madness. We've had it before with other coaches. Now, what I want to also say around the whole Arteta thing, we're so used to, due to the conversations on social media and a kind of reactionary response in the modern age where people have to just come out and make bold statements all the time. So usually when it's like calling for a manager's head, it's done with malice. Like under Emery, it grew into real anger and spite, you know, Emery out and God knows what in terms of protest. There is no anger and spite with this Arteta situation, but I do start to think now, because what I wanted to see over those last two games had enough kind of in his repertoire, as it were, to be able to adjust to situations and navigate it accordingly. Because, you know, down periods in football, they happen. That's the way it is. But what has been so alarming over the last 2 weeks is Arteta's constant navigation back to the same old tactics and same approach to games that were not working in the first place. And obviously the attacking situation is absolutely dire, and that's the main kind of focal point of a lot of fan angst at the moment. I think rightly so.
I think it's just that obviously the reactionary kind of short-term nature of what we face is going to have an impact. I mean, you rewind back to the United game and the euphoria around that result. It's very different how things have changed. And I always look at footballers like, it's a paradox in a way, because whilst football happens so quickly and games come at you so fast, the gaps between games feel like an eternity. And it feels so long until Arsenal can put things right with that next result that this kind of negativity will fester around this result, and obviously the Aston Villa result and the Leeds result and the one before that.
And so the Wolves result,
it snowballs, of course. And we will get onto kind of the long terminology of things, but the kind of malaise surrounding Arsenal's relationship with the North London derby of recent as well will continue, I feel, to build upon that. So
I mean, just one note on the Arteta thing. I think what we get into now, and particularly why frustration is bubbling over for a lot of us, it's not just the dross that is on the field at the moment, because it's unmistakable how bad we look. Yeah. But for me, what is separating my feeling from Arteta is the justification that he's coming out with afterwards. He looks mad. Like, it's like you can't look at what we are producing in the field and draw any positivity out of it. He's spinning it like we were really in the game. We're doing this. Talking about putting balls into the box, like crosses, like that's some coherent strategy. It's absolutely not. And that, for me, is removing more of my faith than just the awful performances that we're seeing week in, week out.
Daniel Anderson in the chat says, Tom, I still trust Arteta. Many forget how bad our squad is. Be honest, would we win a combined 11 with any of the top 7 clubs? If we manage to get into the Europa League, I think it's an acceptable season based upon that. Well, that's the level Arsenal are now, which is a really disappointing fact, but ultimately probably what is the case right now because of a long-term of problems that Arsenal face. Before I jump on to Drew, not physically, let's add...
Yeah, that's not allowed.
Definitely not. Not in this COVID environment anyway, because otherwise, just hugs all day long. French, good to have you in the chat, mate. Absolute pleasure to have you back. How are you doing, fella?
Yeah, as good as I could be considering the circumstances. Yeah, all right.
Yes. You do not have any idea how many times I've heard the words "considering the circumstances" in the last 24 hours when I've spoken to anyone. I texted Lee Judges earlier and he was like, yep, considering the circumstances, I'm actually okay.
Do you know what, Tom? Do you know what's funny, actually, about your guests today? All of your guests look like the same bloke at different times of the day.
Oh, dearie me. With very different fashion senses, though, to be fair.
Yeah.
Very different. Yeah. You're in the Christmas mood. Drew can't help but wear a beanie unless he's wearing a blue headband. And, I mean, French, you've brought some colour to the show with that lovely ensemble that you're sporting. What is that? What even is that?
It's a jacket.
I know. Okay, yeah, okay. No, I asked for that. I asked for that. Drew, let's talk about the considering the circumstances type of chat. I knew what was going to happen in this game. I knew what Mourinho was going to do. You knew what Mourinho was going to do, and yet we did exactly what he wanted us to do. Yeah. Why is my question?
We've talked about it before. I kind of feel like, again, it's Arteta's first full season. I think his primary concern for him is going to try to nail down how he wants us to play, whether if that's, sacrificing the nature of some of the results. Maybe he might take that, into consideration moving forward. But I think for now, it seems like at least that he's really hell-bent on trying to get things in working order and then trying to weed out who can fit what he wants and maybe who he might want to move on from, say, this coming summer. The following summer potentially, I'm not quite sure, but we've kind of seen this before. And in fairness, at least in the beginning under Emery, we saw similar. But maybe like halfway through his reign, Emery sort of completely threw out the window whatever he was trying to do, and then we didn't know what he was trying to do at that point. So he didn't stick to his guns a little bit. He tried to. I don't know what he tried to do. I don't think any of us really do halfway through. But I feel like with Arteta, I think he's just kind of stuck to that. This is how I want to play. This is how I want to operate, and come hell or high water, this is kind of the ethos I want to bring to the club, and then try to figure out who can fit in into the pieces where we're struggling at the minute. I think we could all probably agree that what they said before, if you look at who's in and around us in the table, top 7, top 8, maybe even top 10, we're not top 7 right now in terms of quality. And we've fallen that far down, and I think that might be a little bit of a damning indictment, but that's the reality of it. So, and Arteta's going to be a manager who's going to want to play, hopefully eventually play progressive football. And you do need a certain type of player profile to really, to hammer that home. And that's why you can look at sides like, Brighton are playing right now, and Brighton obviously play. Potter's trying to get them to play a little bit more of a progressive system, but they're still not remotely to the level of, the bigger clubs. So that's why they can have players perform so well and consistently, because he does have players that fit what he wants to do. But with Arsenal right now, it just seems like, you look at the 11 and you see so many players struggling. Even in fairness, even Aubameyang doesn't really fit how Arteta wants to play. That's the brass tacks of it. And it's not saying he's not a good footballer. It just doesn't fit the puzzle. And there's nothing wrong with that. So it's a tough task for him. It's frustrating. I mean, it is kind of hard to sit there and listen to the post-match presser and look at the nature of the run of play and say, we did limit the amount of real key chances Spurs had, but the difference is Spurs are in form, they're confident, especially Son and Kane they have an incredible partnership at the minute, and they flourished through that. So they took their chances, whereas we had a few chances where you could say maybe if some of our players were in form, we take that, we maybe get a goal or two in that game. So I don't think it was a completely dreadful performance, but I do think we were second best, and you could really say that for almost every single league match this season. Even the ones where we've won, we never really looked convincing. And that, for me, I think is the problem. So even if we're getting 3 points, it's like, well, did we truly deserve the 3 points? Did we kind of stroke a bit of luck? I'm not quite sure. But I was angry about it, obviously, in the immediate aftermath of the match. But upon reflection, you never want to lose your biggest rival. But really, Spurs are ahead of us. They've been ahead of us for 2 years. And losing to them now, it is, yeah. Well, probably. I mean, I'm being very, very conservative with that estimate, but
yeah.
It's if you're honest with yourselves, no one looks at that tie now and say we have a chance. Right now, currently, we don't. Spurs are ahead, and we would do well to get a draw, maybe a win, and that sucks to think about, but that's where we are. And every club goes through their own evolutions of down periods. Bar clubs like Bayern and Juventus and that ilk. But when you're at the level that we're at, you do go through your own evolutions and revolutions, and things will change. You have down periods. Everyone constantly compares us to Liverpool, but Liverpool had their massive down spell for a while where they were barely scraping into the top 7. And now look at them now. So that's kind of that's kind of the benchmark in terms of how you can if under the right manager, under the right sort of transfer deals, you bring in the right players, and things can come good again. So it's a longer process. And certainly, I think for now, anyone who is selling Arteta out shirts right now.
Don't.
needs to look in the mirror a bit, because it takes a lot longer period of time. You know, it's young manager. God. It's not like we've brought in. It's not like we brought in. I don't know, Allegri, and it's just dire under Allegri. Then I think people could say, you know, that may have been a waste of time, but which we have to be patient for me, and I think that's the frustrating part. And I think, to our credit, but also to my dismay, I think Arsenal, the fan base as a whole overall, sometimes does act a bit spoiled because of the good times we did have. You know, we did have an invincible season. We have had players like Thierry Henry, Dennis Bergkamp, and the list goes on and on. I do think that fans want that back, but I don't think that they're truly prepared to go through the down period that we're about to go through. It could be 5 or 6 years until we're right back in, you know, top 4, top 3 fighting for the league. And I don't know if fans are. They need to have that.
You do know.
Can I just
go on, Johnny?
Can I just say, I mean, you know, I respect your points of view there, Drew, but I disagree with a lot of it, to be honest, in the sense that.
How dare you get out?
First of all, I don't agree with you in terms of in the derby. Granted, I concede that Spurs are better than Arsenal in terms of their starting lineup, their best players, etc. But we should never be going into derbies against Tottenham not believing that we can get a win or a draw. Even when we were flat tracking the whole league, Spurs would always give us a game because it's a derby. And what Arteta has to do, you know, the players have to do, but Arteta is the steward of the team and is imbued on him to be able to get the players up for a derby. You have to, because in a derby you can play beyond the sum of your parts because of that intensity. And
okay, pause or fast. I agree with you on that one. I'm not saying I think it's okay for us to go into the derby and say, well, you know, we're behind them, so we can't expect anything. I just think that if you're a realist about it, we are now the one that are behind Spurs. So we have to give that extra percentage where maybe the onus was on Spurs to give that extra percentage to make up the gap. The roles are now reversed. That's what I'm saying. I agree with you that, and Arteta should know as a former player of the club, this is a fixture where no matter how your season is going, you don't lose to Spurs. And we've seen this in other derbies around Europe. You know, no matter how it's going for Schalke, they'll always at least make the attempt to try to big up themselves to come at Dortmund in a match. And sometimes they come through, sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's a disaster, but they at least still come with the right mentality. And I don't think we have that right now. And there's a lot of reasons why I don't think we do. And that, for me, I agree with you, it's frustrating. So not to interject, but and continue though.
No worries. And the only other thing I was just going to say is that this is a notion that I hear a lot with regards to Arsenal fans, in the sense that we are entitled, like we believe that it's just owed to us. You know, I just really disagree with this statement. Like, first of all, Arsenal are the 3rd most successful team in England. Have been before Wenger came. We are now after Wenger left. We would expect, because we are the 3rd most successful team, to be there or thereabouts when it comes to trophies in terms of success over that period. We are absolutely not. And it's not like we're doing knee-jerk reactions now. If you look at since the last time we won the league, I mean, we're talking like, you know, nearly 20 years ago. And in that time, yes, we've challenged on the odd year, but we have been in, I would say, steady decline. And at this point, we have to say, where is the club moving? Because we need to get to our par is being the 3rd most successful team in England. So that's our par. Otherwise, we are in decline as a club, and we as fans should not stand for it. And it won't be, you know, knee-jerk if after 15 years of not win, 16 years, 17 years, 20 years not win a league, we go, listen, that's the standard. We have to be challenging for the league. If we don't challenge for the league, it's not acceptable. We won't accept it anymore. So, sorry, that's just my take on it.
No, real fast. And I know French is sitting there on his hands like, well, why am I here? Let me just dip out and go back to what I was doing. But again, I don't disagree with you. I just kind of feel like, for me, it's difficult because you could throw, you know, American sports references, and like if you're like a New York Yankees fan, you feel like, you know, you're the most successful baseball team in MLB, so you should be winning the World Series every year, as an example. So I agree with the mentality of that when you are a club, at least on a domestic front, as massive as Arsenal truly are, you should be, again, base level, you should be if we're not top 4, it should be considered an awful season. And I agree with that, because if you look at bigger clubs around Europe, that they have the mentality. If Bayern doesn't win the league, Munich's going to get burned to the ground overnight. And I agree with that sort of mentality. But again, I do feel that you have to take each season for base value. And I don't think reactions are knee-jerk anymore. I think a long time ago they were a little bit knee-jerk, but now it's clear that, you know, we've been trending down for the better part of the last decade. I don't think anyone can disagree with that. I just feel that the way that football works and how it's evolved and the nature of the Premier League, because of how much money has come in, how many more clubs are well run, the quality in the league, it's going to take a bit of time. And I think that's the part that frustrates me, is that fans have to understand that it cannot happen overnight. But on the flip side, you do want to see upward trending every year, which we haven't seen. So that's the frustration for me. And I think that's the part where everyone is justified as being annoyed. But it can't just be, now we're fixed and now we're winning the league again. It's just more of, we need to see this instead of this. We're seeing none of that. And I think that's, for me, where the frustration comes in. So. French, on to you.
French, let me set you up with this then, because from what Johnny and Drew are saying, you should, in my view, I agree with Johnny, you should compete in a North London derby. You should not be so outclassed like we were in that game. And I also feel like the manager should set you up tactically in a way to combat what was, in my opinion, a very predictable performance from Spurs. It was something that any pretty much level-headed fan could see what Spurs have done this season and what they were going to do against a very attacking Arsenal side. I say attacking with very little end product, but still the same point stands. So looking at the situation as a whole, using this these run of games as a barometer, and as Johnny said right at the start about this kind of Arteta out seeping into the fan base and gradually getting more public through social media, at what point do you have to turn around and say that it is getting to the point where it's so bad that it can't? Say if you get to the point of Christmas, we're not scoring goals, so it's within the realms of possibility in my mind that we could lose to Burnley or draw 0-0. We could lose to Southampton or draw 0-0. We could lose to Everton, draw 0-0. We could definitely lose to Chelsea. Like, it's really within the realms of possibility at the moment, considering how we're playing, that these things could happen. So even as someone who's very much wants to trust the process, wants to give Arsenal and Arteta the time to learn from his mistakes, get the personnel that we need, how long do you give this, and what needs to ultimately, in your mind, change in the short term that can't just be solved by adding new players?
That can't be solved by new players. I'm not sure there's very much, to be perfectly honest with you. It sounds like Johnny's already bought one of the Arteta out shirts. I'm not.
I saw him retweeting them. He was retweeting them all last night. That's what he was doing.
I haven't. I'm kind of, I'm not completely sure in terms of where I am with that. It's definitely like I'm definitely backing Arteta, but in terms of seeing where it's going, I have some worries. I have some concerns, as I think everyone does. For me, right now, it looks like it's very hard for him to kind of win in terms of what he can do with this current squad. He was playing what, for me, is the best system for the squad that we have, which is a 3 at the back and playing quite conservative because we don't really have the runners in midfield to play a more modern 4-3-3 kind of formation. And he was getting criticized for not being creative and, you know, this and that, and which were fair criticisms of the team, of the way we were playing. But I believe that was probably the most efficient way that we could play most of our games. And so when for example, in this game where he does something which for me was quite unexpected. I didn't see it coming that he would play a 4 at the back. I thought it was going to be the same sort of setup against Manchester United, in which we were very competitive in an away game against the top 6 side. So for me, I was expecting that. I was expecting that to play through, but I was expecting him to maybe even play for a draw, to be perfectly honest with you. Like it looked like we were sort of doing against Man City, you know, and trying to nick something when we could. But it's almost as if Arteta kind of listened to the criticisms of, you're not creative enough, we're not creating enough chances. And he thought, well, I need to create more chances. And so he tried to play more attacking in the one game that we shouldn't have been more attacking in. And it was quite strange for me, because that's the worry for me, is that maybe he's listening too much to all the outside pressure and the outside voices, and he's thinking, right, I've got to jump to step 5 in my plan, when really our squad is not ready to take step 5, as Drew was saying. We don't have those players yet. So I don't know. I think it's kind of tough for me to really be mad at him for choosing to go more attacking, because for the past few games we've been criticizing him for being too conservative and not creating enough. It's just the one game that you shouldn't do it in, and yeah, we could have all seen it coming. But in terms of how long it can go, it's obviously a point where it's just not tenable for to be around these kind of positions. Points wise, we're not, we don't look like we're 2 places off relegation. Well, I think we're as far off relegation as we are off Champions League places. But in terms of position, we can't really be going into New Year in 15th, 14th, 30th, like 16th sort of thing.
If Brighton win today, they go above us.
That's only enough for so long. Like, there's a point at which the results will just speak for themselves and it won't be tenable. I tend to think it won't get quite to that decline. For me, I'm definitely on the side of patience, because I think there's also an element of players just maybe even knowing that they're not a part of the long-term future. Arteta's mentioned quite a few times, we need a lot of players. Since he came in, the first thing he said is, it's not magic. We need investment. We need money. We need new players. And after a couple of losses, or even wins, he said the same sort of thing. So I wonder if some of these players, people like Granit Xhaka, for example, who was a sure fixture in our starting 11, he until Partey got injured, he wasn't playing as much recently. And I just wonder if, maybe some other players, maybe players like Rob Holding, who was going out on loan, or Bellerin, who was mooted for a move away. Maybe some of these players aren't as in it as they could be, and maybe that's playing a part in it as well. I think there's just a whole kind of clear project that needs to take place. Now, the one accusation I can make of Arteta that I can quite clearly make is, right now, it looks like he's making a few short-term decisions, as well as, and obviously it's a hard thing to balance, but as well as trying to manage this long-term project. And Drew mentioned it himself, Aubameyang isn't made for Arteta's way of playing. But under Arteta, we signed him to a bumper contract, 350k or whatever, to a 31-year-old who all of a sudden looks 31.
Is that on Arteta though? Like, genuine? Is that on? I know that he has to sign off on that.
I think it's very hard to blame him, because we all wanted it to happen. And I think, on the one side, we all said, sign him, sign him, sign him. Drew disagrees.
Drew didn't. And to be fair,
no, a lot of people didn't. Fair enough. But a lot of us, sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, I was listening to the Arsenal Vision podcast, which if you don't, people, you should, because it's excellent with Elliot and Clive and that. And Elliot brought up the point that we gave a contract to Aubameyang for the things that he has done. We didn't give him a contract for the things that he's going to do, which is what ultimately you should always do. Is you shouldn't reward players with a contract for the things they've done. You should give a player a contract and look ahead to the potential that they give you. If you sign someone onto a contract on increased wages, a 31-year-old that is going to be here until he's 33, those years that he's 31, 32, 33, in all of, like, you can pray and you can hope, but in the law of averages, a player who goes between the years of 31 to 33 is not going to provide you, especially of a style of Aubameyang, is not going to provide you with the output of Aubameyang from 29 to 31. So it made little to no sense in the end to do that. And I was one of those people that said, sign him up, please. Please sign him, because the alternative was trying to find a striker that was as good as him. And I just couldn't trust the club, in my mind, I suppose, to do that. Does that make sense?
I think you've answered your question though, Tom, there. I mean, we didn't sign him for his next few years like he's going to be the best. It's the fear of losing him, because he had a very high stock. He can lay out his last 3-4 seasons and say, there you go, 20 goals a year, every year, sign on the dotted line, that's what I produce. And if you don't pay me, I'll leave. And he, arguably would have interest, because he's been performing that consistently. And we, for where we are as a club, have no chance of signing a player of that elite level to play up front for us. No chance. So we could be heading into this year with Lacazette on his own.
Yeah.
Can't even get dropped. I mean, every week, Lacquer and Eddie. Like, I don't think it was great that we signed him, Aubameyang, to a bumper deal, but we had to do it. Like, but it's obviously a similar mistake to, but a much more severe mistake, obviously, is the Mesut Ozil contract. For again, PR and politics couldn't actually risk losing him at the time.
And French, I want to go back to the Batman, because you brought up the point. Kian in the chat says, why talk about being a legend when he signed and then give the performances? Like the performance as well, he talked about, and usually I wouldn't usually go down this route, because I don't, and Drew will tell you, Aubameyang's never been the type to press and be this guy that puts in 110% effort from watching him at Dortmund. But if you're Aubameyang and your signing on video is all around the rhetoric of, I want to be a club legend, I want to speak to Ian Wright and one day look back at the video of me speaking to Ian Wright and be on a par with him, you don't then do what has been happening that we've seen. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, I mean, like we said already, a lot of it's kind of PR and this sort of thing, isn't it? You know, it was. We were all happy to see him sign, but we all know a lot of that stuff sounded pretty corny when he was saying it. To be perfectly honest, you know what I mean. Yeah. So it sort of is what it is. I think with that regard, but it's definitely, for the fact that he's the captain, it's not acceptable. The kind of the body language, the way that he was kind of turning his back on headers at the end there. I mean, it was very strange to see, to be honest. And I tend to think that it's not like, it's not just age. I think there's a psychological thing going on there where he just, I don't know, he's been shouldering the load and, to be honest, overperforming last season for so long. There's a point at which, I don't know, maybe the bubbles just kind of burst. I mean, it's hard for him to keep laughing and smiling. He's a laughing, smiling guy. And when we're in 15th, you know, it's not easy for him to keep laughing and smiling. Maybe it's just a psychological thing. Like where you said, I think Drew will probably agree. He's never necessarily been that guy to be kind of a mentality monster, as it was. You know, I think.
Well, he's not a leader, is he? He's not a leader. He's just a very good player. And I think everyone can see that. Like you say, smiling. You know, he's a likable guy. He's reliable in terms of his goal scoring output, but he's not someone who drags the team, and we haven't had one of them for a really long time.
I mean, Lacazette had more of a captain's performance than him against Spurs. You know, he was
I was impressed with Lacazette. I genuinely, I enjoyed Lacazette, but I thought he was the only one that came out of that game with really any credit, to be honest. And we've criticised him. I think what I hope that people who watch the show realise that there isn't really agendas when it comes to. I know we love to have a laugh and a joke about some players that get a little bit more criticism than others. But we have criticised Lacazette quite a bit this season. But I felt that he did show yesterday that he can maybe play in that slightly deeper role. It's something I never thought he could do, to be honest. I don't think it's something you look at the long term. Arsenal still need to invest in that area and add a quality player. But in the short term, until January minimum, I feel that it's something that we should probably carry on with. The only alternative to that, and Johnny, I'll come to you before I go to Drew, and just say, in terms of like, I don't want to really linger on the Spurs result too much. I think it's important that we look forward. And it comes down to personnel, and it's something that I do think that Arteta that's the biggest challenge that he's got is the current squad of players that's at his disposal. He has tried really hard to get this back four working and then playing a 4-3-3. And in my mind, from watching it, I just don't think he has the players to play that system. And under Arteta, we had some really good success playing the 3-4-3 formation. It won us an FA Cup playing that formation, and we have the personnel to play that formation. Do you think it is a sensible idea, until we get the personnel, to maybe park the 4-3-3 idea, which is, it's worth it for the long term, but park that for now, and whilst we need to turn around these results in the short term, revert to what worked in the next few games?
I mean, I think that there's nothing else for it in that respect. Shout out to these guys in the chat as well, because I've seen a few great comments. Christopher Fung, my mate from last week's back again, and Owen as well. Shout out to you as well for listening to the podcast. Thanks for that. But also some great points about basically, you know, we have a squad that is deficient in many areas, and you have to say that if we are implementing a formation or playing style that is not suited to our the players, the personnel that we have, then that is incumbent on the manager. It's as simple as that. It's very interesting what Drew and French were saying. You know, it's not even about, this is what I was trying to say at the start. It's not even about Arteta out. It's about whether you look at this geezer and think, are you a quality coach? Are you going to go to the next level? And I was more optimistic before, and now for what I'm seeing, I'm not sure anymore, because some of the things he's doing. What I liked about Arteta, one of the things he really brought to the club was strong decisions. Even if people didn't believe in them, he would make the decision around Ozil, for instance. It doesn't matter what you think about Ozil. Arteta made the decision, and I backed Arteta to make the decision. but you have to deliver if you make bold decisions. You can't just make loads of weird, erroneous decisions and then play awfully and expect no flack. You know, there are issues around Saliba. There's issues around Ozil. Why is Xhaka? And I don't get me wrong, I think Xhaka played really well towards the end of last season, but he's awful at the moment. Lacazette has been awful for weeks. Granted, we did say that in the NLD he was actually good. And so for me, like, you know, if you make big decisions, they have to be delivered upon. Otherwise, you start to look like someone who's just kind of not really got a plan. And I've gone from thinking he had a plan, and then I would be bought in, to does he really even know what's going on before? Because when you had question marks over Arteta's appointment, it was about the fact that he had no managerial experience. And what that experience is, it's not, have you got experience of winning the league every year? Most managers don't. It's about when things get dirty and grimy, are you going to have the skill set to turn things around? And he currently hasn't shown that he can. So when we talk about the formation in particular, absolutely, you know, last year, it seemed like we were, you know, set up certainly to contain the big sides and spring on them, and we got some really positive results. If we are to say that he doesn't have the personnel this year to play his more expansive style, of which I'm not even sure we can credit that to him, that we're going to play an expansive style, because we've never seen it. So why is that going to happen? It seems a little bit like Emery Mark II. Why are we whipping balls into the box like we've got some Duncan Ferguson up there? We haven't. You know, if anything, this playing style seems really confused and stale. But if we look at an insufficient squad, some of that blame has to come on Arteta as well. He's had a summer, and he has had more influence over the personnel recruits. He signed Willian. Willian is a disaster, and that has to come down on Arteta. Partey looks like a very good player, but obviously, you know, been unlucky with injuries there. But, you know, if we're going to also give Arteta this, you know, badge of honour for being able to train up players, when you look at like a Saliba who've come in, a Pepe who, you know, the decision, I don't even think the decision's still out on him. He just doesn't look like he's at a £72 million player. I would expect Arteta to improve these players to be able to fit that new way of playing that he wants to engineer at Arsenal. And if not, you can't just kind of give him a free pass and say, yeah, the players just ain't up to it. Well, you either make them good enough or you sign them, because the players that we have signed are just simply nowhere near the standard we need. And that has to, I'm afraid, at least in part, come down to Arteta himself.
Well, there's the third option is, as the manager, it's your job to be able to get the best out of what you have. And while you could argue that our squad's not top 4, top 5 quality, we do still have very good players at the club. But Arteta is not doing everything that he can to get the best tune out of the trombone. And this goes back to Arsene Wenger. And as much as I love Arsene Wenger, we're back to the square pegs and round holes argument. If you look at what is probably our strongest 11, so you have Oba, Lacazette, you know, Pepe as the front three. You can have Partey, you know, Granit Xhaka, and whatever third midfielder you want. And then, you know, the standard back four, so Tierney, Bayern, I don't know, Gabriel Luis. Yeah. And even Leno as well in goal. That side is tailor-made. It's better than 15th, but it's also tailor-made to be direct, incisive, play at pace, run at teams, utilize space in behind. It's made for that, and we're not doing that. So for me, to circle back what we were talking about before, about how Arteta's come in and he's insistent on hammering down how he wants to play, eventually you have to look at it and say, if these players aren't capable of doing it, for whatever reason that might be, two options are either I persist and I watch the ship just go down bow first, or I change my tactics to get the best out of the players I have now. And over time, if I get more players in that suit what I want to do, then I start tapering my tactics to suit the metamorphosis of the squad. And he's not doing that. And that, for me, is my biggest criticism. I think being a young manager and you want to impress and you're headstrong, you know, you put your head down and say, this is how I want to do things, this is how I want to do things. But it's like young politicians, kind of the same thing. You come in, your first term as a congressman or a congresswoman, or your first term as MP or whatever it may be. And it's just like, this is how I want to be, and I want to be bold, and I want to show who I am. But eventually, sometimes that can and will backfire pretty often. And right now, I think for Arteta, it is backfiring. And again, even if you look at it, if you know that we're going to re-sign Aubameyang, one of your prime directives as a manager at that point should be, how am I going to get the best out of my star striker? How am I going to find him as many goals as possible? And the evidence is glaring about how you get Aubameyang goals. Just watch him at any point during his Dortmund career. You'll know how you get Aubameyang to score goals. Even Lacazette. People forget that Lacazette was banging goals in for fun at Lyon, and Lyon have never been a possession-based team. They were always directed, incisive, and they always drove play, let people have freedom. Nicola Pepe, you spend £72 million on a player, then you don't allow him to get on the ball and express himself, to drive play forward. That, for me, is the biggest frustrating thing. Whether if it's a 3-4-3 or 4-3-3 or God knows whatever other formation is, when you're without the ball, when you're with the ball, with the players that we have, right now it's clear to me there's a certain type of way you need to play, and we just don't do it. And for me, that's kind of where the ball drops.
I mean, formations aside, one of the major things, and I don't want to be, to look at just basic minutiae of the, of our playing style, but if you could just have one bit of advice for the team, it's play faster. We're so slow. Yeah. Everything is so stilted. In terms of when Arsenal have been at their best, and granted, he might not want to make Wenger's team part 2, fair enough. But we used to break on people so quickly. Hate to say it, look at the way Spurs are now. That's how they get their success going forward. They move it so quick, pop, pop, pop. We just play in front of people. That's why we can't break down deep blocks. We just move the ball so slow. And I think personnel, the likes of Xhaka, etc., are part of the issue.
Well, we moved it quickly with slow players, though, didn't we? Santi Cazorla is not a fast player.
Yeah.
And Mikel Arteta, when he played, was not a fast player. Yet, because we passed the ball so efficiently and so directly, and as Drew says, the key word is incisiveness, because we did that then, we looked a lot faster than the sum of our parts actually were. And that is what we're not doing now. And I think it's always going to boil down to this fact that Arteta is trying to do something without the tools to do it. And the measure of Arteta eventually is going to come down to whether he admits that he can't do it currently, and that actually he looks at what he's got and tries to get the best from what he does, which there has been evidence of, because he's shown in small fits and spurts at the end of last season that he was able to get the best from some of the players in our squad, like Granit Xhaka at the time, like Shkodran Mustafi, like these players, like Hector Bellerin. He gradually got Hector Bellerin better. He's still, in my opinion, flawed as a player, and that has ultimately cost him, and especially defensively and getting too far up the pitch. But he was better than he was before Arteta came in. And I think ultimately there is hope in that. But the stubbornness is the biggest thing I fear. That is what I fear the most, is whether or not he will change and he will decide to use different tactics to what we've currently got. French, do you want to come in on this quickly?
I don't know. I'm not exactly on the same page as you guys, in the sense that I'm kind of worried that I feel like, first of all, when he came in, he was playing like a sort of 4 at the back formation, and we did very well for a while. I mean, you could say it was like a new manager bounce, but I don't think we won our first couple of games. But from the new year, we went undefeated until, domestically until the COVID, and yeah, we did very well. As you mentioned, when he came back, he made adjustments because he dropped notably Mesut Ozil from the team. He had to try and figure out other ways of playing. He tried 4 at the back against Villa at home, and it looked terrible, and so he kept going back to 3 at the back, and then that worked well. So for me, I think he is capable of making these adjustments, and if it's just, the worry for me is that if he keeps trying to sort of chop and change and not kind of keep an eye on his philosophy, there is a concern for me that he just slips and falls, and he's just grabbing out things that maybe work for a couple of games, and then we get figured out. And I almost feel that's kind of what happened in terms of 3 at the back. It was what Emery did, I think what Wenger did. People just kind of go to a 3 at the back because it's what suits our players. It's what suits the players we have, but we're still not very, very good at it. And then it feels like, people have to compromise on their philosophy, try and figure something out. And when that doesn't work, it's just, you're sort of slipping and trying to grab out at things. And that's the kind of slippery slope that for me is almost the beginning of the end. So yeah. I kind of worry about that. I almost feel like it's better for him to just persist, be crap, get better players in, and then, you know, just try and make that work and adjust, you know, make compromises. Don't be too stubborn, as we said, make compromises. But I don't want him to go too much into just finding what works for now, because I'm worried that short-termism will make us kind of lose sight and we'll go back into that kind of loop a little bit. And yeah, that's what worries me.
And that's a fair worry, because it's about finding the balance. Like, you have to get short-term wins because the form is so bad right now that we are going to have to make changes in the short term to arrest that. But I completely understand that he can't lose sight of what he wants to achieve in the long term. I just think that we just don't have the personnel to achieve that four at the back currently system that he wants to do. And I think when he gets Pepe back, with how good he's been in the Europa League, I say good, it's a very, very different opposition, I'm aware of that, but he has looked better. It's kind of been the break and the kind of the reset button that he's kind of needed, I think, at his Arsenal career to be taken out of the Premier League spotlight for a little bit. So maybe when he comes back, things can change in that sense. But his philosophy with the personnel, it just doesn't seem to be working in the short term, and that is going to take sacrifices, honestly.
Definitely.
Anyone would like to make a quick thing before we go on to questions?
Just on Nick, like, I mean, this is what it boils down to me. Now, I understand the reticence to kind of be on that, you know, to be seen as being an Arteta out or whatever, like, you know, trying to rally to get rid of a manager. But it's not really about, like, we're not baiting for blood here. It's, are we going in the right direction? I'd like to ask both Drew and French. You know, genuinely, we talked about, you know, there might be that moment where the position's untenable. Where do you think that moment is? Because how far are we away? Like, if we lose our next 2 games, can we leave him in the job at the moment? Because we look a million miles away from getting anything together right now. And if we do keep losing games, we could be in the relegation zone by Christmas. It's not hyperbole. It's real. We are in free fall. So where is respectively, your lines in the sand? Where do you think that it might become a point where we have to look at changing something?
Shall I go first on that?
Go for it, French.
For me, you said it there. Like, if it looks like you're getting anywhere near points-wise a kind of relegation zone around Christmas time, then clearly it's, for me, that's time to cut it. You know, that's there's no question. For me, the results will just clearly speak for themselves. I don't think that will be the case, but if that does happen, then for me, he's sacking himself, sort of thing. You know what I mean? It's not really up to us.
Drew?
It's tough. I mean, I kind of feel like if you look at after the Christmas period, if you go into the new year, into the January window, and you know, we're genuinely either just outside or in the relegation zone, I think then you have to say,
it's just bad, isn't it? This is crazy. This is crazy.
And it's funny because I just spent the last week taking the absolute piss out of Schalke fans because I absolutely hate the club.
Oh, Schalke! Don't even talk about
and
Schalke,
they're in free fall, but their decline is very similar to ours.
Yeah. So
now I'm just like, well, maybe I spoke too soon, and maybe this is like Justice Earth coming back to hit me in the face. But
I'm just thinking of Deportivo right now.
Exactly. So if we're and it's funny because it's been mentioned that it's not hyperbole. It generally can happen after the Christmas period. There's an actual chance if we don't find form that we can actually be in and around a relegation zone. That's baffling to think about. But if it comes to that, then you have to say Arteta might be on borrowed time. You know, it's one thing to say, give the manager time. Let's see what he can do. You know, give him time to bed in his system and see how the players get on with them. That doesn't include battling relegation. And I don't want to sound alarmist, obviously, but the fact is that those are 2 very different things. You know, giving a new manager time at a big club might be, you know, we're in 5th, 6th, or 7th, you know, something like that, not where we currently are. Even where we are currently are right now is too far down the table. And we spoke about it earlier, that this is way below where a club of Arsenal's stature should be and should linger. If it lingers for another month or 2, you have to say that Arteta is on borrowed time. So I think for me, that line in the sand might be the Christmas period. And I don't like to be reactionary. Everybody knows that. And I think people saying Arteta out, you know, before the season or even now, I think it's a bit much because there's still time. But that time is about a month or 2. In a month or 2, I might even say, listen, like, if I'm the board or if I'm Edu, you have to sit him down and say, this is unacceptable. If by then February nothing changes, there might be some hard.
So what you're saying? You're saying we should send you an Arteta shirt out for Christmas.
If I can be on video burning it because everyone says that Choops is my twin, and I'm going to punch them all in the face.
Oh yeah, it got to the stage where I had to literally ban the word troops from being able to be typed in.
Everyone's getting drop kicked essentially. So
I never thought it until today, to be honest with you, until you got really angry.
The thing is about what you're saying, and we're going to jump into questions just now, is that there's two points I want to raise from what you guys have said from Johnny's question. Is that if it was a case of Arsenal were losing games like 3-2, 2-1, drawing games 1-1, 2-2, they're things that you can actually arrest, like, because you're scoring goals. But the fact that we are not scoring is the pure basic element of a game of football that you're ever going to pick up points in. So that is the big killer factor, is that if Arsenal don't start scoring goals, like, you could draw 0-0s up until Christmas, and I still think you'd have to cut the cord if you were in the top half with those points, which I doubt you would be. But because you're not scoring, that is ultimately the biggest thing. And when you've got someone like Aubameyang out front, if he's not scoring, I understand that we're creating the wrong types of opportunities, but there is a level where you have to go that Aubameyang is that good of a player that you can keep throwing balls into the box, and he should be good enough to at least take some of them. So I think that is a factor. I also think when looking at it, thinking about the possibilities and the realism of it all, a club that is top of the league by Christmas most times goes on to actually win the title. So a club that is in and around the relegation zone by Christmas, it is not reactionary to then think...
No, it's not. And normally, if you're in and around the relegation zone by Christmas, you normally finish in and around the relegation zone coming into the season. It's the same thing. And so just one quick, I don't know how much you guys saw that, and I forget who reported it, but one of them, I think the most damning thing of all is that when you look at it, and we've created the fewest chances of the 92 clubs in the Premier League and the English football ladder. That's a problem. Yeah, like, it's one thing if you're creating chances and the ball's just not going in. Sometimes that's football, and sometimes that happens. Like, you just can't catch a break. You're hitting woodwork when you shouldn't be. You know, you're a bit off form. We're not doing anything with in possession. We're literally the worst team with the ball in England right now. Yeah. So, and again, that's not a reactionary statement. That's fact. So at that point, you have to be concerned. Yeah.
We as Arsenal fans can't be looking forward to a rally scrap and trying to get safe from January. That's not what we're here for, and that's not being entitled.
And we don't have the players for that either. Like, we can actually go down because we don't have the players for a relegation.
There's no point.
That's the reality, isn't it?
Do you think we could win a 6-pointer with Burnley? Absolutely.
Oh God, the thought of that is scary, isn't it? Really. Anyway,
at least he'd win the title next season.
True. Yes. Yeah, we win the championship. We win the title. Finally, we're competing at the top of the table. Anyway, let's get into the back of positive. I was going to say positives, but I doubt these questions are going to be too much. Boys, I'm just going to say that we've got quite a few. Are you all good for 20 minutes to go through some of these? Is that fine? French, is that good?
I'm out to leave in about 10.
That's fine. If you chuck it in the private chat and let me know, then I'll throw it to you to go. That's fine. Because we have got quite a few, let's try and keep the answers as brief and as slapdash as we possibly can, whilst maintaining quality, of course. I know Juan and Bulgarian Guna want to throw a couple of questions in. I'll make sure that I make a note of those. Johnny, let's start with you. Let's start with you and go for the question from... goodness, I just read a really rude question. Bulgarian Guna, Drago on Twitter says, Steve Round was David Moyes' assistant at Manchester United. One of the Scotsman's issues there were the persistent crosses with no end product. Does Arteta need to reevaluate his coaching staff?
I see this question earlier to you, and I thought it's great because it was getting circulated in our Arsenal WhatsApp group around the Steve Round issue. I think is a perfect point to be made. Why we are whipping in balls into the box like it's David Beckham in 1999, and don't get me wrong, Kieran Tierney's the only one who can deliver good crosses anyway. Saka, you could argue, but everything we've kind of discussed here earlier on in the show, we are not built to attack in that way. So you can't just it's not an issue of data in that way where you can go. That's one of the things that really alienated me the most from Arteta's comments, where it's like, we're crossing it 20 times a game. We should be winning. We should be scoring goals. No, you shouldn't. You don't. Like, just whipping balls into the box blindly doesn't make any difference. If you've got a little 5'6" striker running around, you're never going to score. What are you doing? And the lack of awareness that just crossing balls into the box is not necessarily a guarantee of success is really, really puzzling me. And if anything, it's the worst thing you can do for teams that set up with a deep block, because they've usually just got big guys who header it away. You need quick, intricate football. It's something that we had for years. So where has it gone? You know, and the fact he's not seeing that is one of the biggest, you know, a lot of alarm bells for me with Arteta.
It is. There is alarm bells going off everywhere because, as you say, I remember like when the end of the game against Spurs and in the game against Wolves, we'd been in that situation under Arsene Wenger so many times, and eventually someone would pay that killer pass through for someone to do a cutback, and we'd eventually get the goal. We get a lucky break from a corner or from a long range effort, but we just don't. We're just doing the same. We did 44 crosses against Spurs, which is more than any other team in the Premier League this entire season. Not put together. It sounds like it could be, but that was the level that we were at, and it does ultimately need to change. French, Zamir says, would it be beneficial to lose out on Europe next season? We clear 7 to 8 players next summer, and maybe a season just domestically will help Arteta and the younger players to develop.
I'm going to say no from my personal point of view, because I tend to think that Arteta trusts these older players a lot more in the league. That's what the evidence points towards for me. And also, B, Europa League is the only joy I'm really getting from football this season. If we get rid of that, how am I going to watch Emile Smith-Rowe and Balogun? Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah. I think on a personal level, I don't want to give up Europe. It's always nice to be in 2 competitions. It's always nice to be able to see these other players play. I understand the logic. I don't think it's a logical thing to say. I totally see the logic of it, but for me personally, I wouldn't want to give up Europe, and I don't think Arteta would necessarily play the youngsters as much as we might hope.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair shot, and I think we're ultimately at the moment we're a Champions League budgeted club on Europa League money. Imagine being a Champions League budgeted club on Brighton money. Like, that's the level we could be at. Drew, Christopher Fung says, would more overlapping and underlapping runs help to free up space for others and allow our attack to be less predictable?
Of course. Like, I don't even know how to
yeah.
I don't know where to go from with that answer. Like, but again, and people are talking in the chat about, you know, should we go for Wilfried Zaha instead of Szoboszlai? And I'm sitting here and I'm saying it doesn't matter who we sign in the market if you're not going to play a brand of football that brings out the best in those players. You could buy Messi right now and it wouldn't matter. And I almost genuinely mean that. And that to me is it's frustrating. But our movement off the ball has been so diabolically poor. And this is where my biggest criticism of Oba comes in is you have a player who has that kind of pace, that kind of understanding of space behind the defenders, how he knows how to run off the shoulder, and he's just not doing it. And you know, when you have Lacazette coming back to drop deep, you have Nico Pepe he's on vacation. Half of it his fault, half of it isn't. You have the players to make these kind of overlapping, underlapping runs, but we're just not doing it. Instead, it's peripheral play, constant recycling possession, 35 yards out from goal. No penetrative play. It's why people are asking how could we lose to Villa so comfortably and then Villa go on and lose to God knows who with 3 on the spin. It's because of this. We make it so easy for our opposition to defend against us because of this. There's no incisive movement. Part of making a run isn't just about I'm going to receive the ball in space. It's I'm going to drag a defender away so I can create space for somebody else. Yeah. And that's when I get so angry about Oba not making those runs, particularly, or whoever it might be. I pick on him because he's constantly starting every match, and he's one of the ones that isn't really performing his duties. So I cite that reference, but you see it across the team. And the only time we really do see it is in the Europa League, but with all due respect, it's easier to do that against someone like Rapid Vienna, who are 12 levels below what we're seeing in the Premier League every weekend. So you have to look at it with a different microscope. So yeah, I think those things like that would help. But either we're not being tasked to do it, or the players can't be asked to do it, or it's a bit of both. I don't know, but lots of things could help right now, but none of it's happening. So it's kind of almost irrelevant.
Nicely segues actually in talking about the players not being asked to do it into the next question, Johnny, from Juan Felipe Palacio Rivera, who has the best name in the chat by far. He says, "Hi Tom, how does Arteta drop the players he needs to drop without losing the dressing room, because they could throw him under the bus?"
Do you know, it's funny the way that the question's even phrased, actually, like, you know, from the perspective it kind of comes from, in the sense that I think at this stage you lose the dressing room by not dropping the players that need to be dropped. The whole point is we have a squad, right, where you're asking them to raise their intensity, raise their performance. If you keep rewarding subpar performances, then you're setting the precedent for your squad. You're saying this is what we tolerate. Shit performances week in, week out, and you can give it a go. And it's like, no, you know, at some point there has to be accountability. This is what I'm always saying about with football, but, you know, Arsenal in particular. There needs to be accountability when it comes to mistakes. We know that there are going to be mistakes being made, but, you know, someone has to stand up and say that's not good enough, and there will be consequences. The reality is again, for an issue with Arteta in general, I see players, not necessarily now, but anytime Mustafi starts, you know, it's a dagger to my heart. The guy needs to get out, full stop. But, you know, when you're talking about, like, in terms of squad selection at the moment, it's well known, as I've said on here, I'm not pleased with Willian's input. But when you look at what Ainsley Maitland-Niles has put together in midweek, and granted, is a Europa League level squad, but what he offers for me is dynamism, and he will run, and he's got legs and athleticism, which is sorely missed whenever you're talking about Xhaka and Ceballos playing there. You've got players like Heung-min Son running at us, Kane running at us, you know, even Bergwijn and people like that from Tottenham. They drift past our midfield because they're so slow. And we need players who, you know, again, if you're putting in shifts in Europa League, and granted the level's lower, but if you're performing well, and then people are coming out in a North London derby and not trying properly and not putting in proper shifts, they can't start the next game. That, for me, is how you get the you keep the squad on board, because you show this performance is unacceptable, and if you play like that, you're gone.
There's an interesting thing about Ainsley Maitland-Niles in the interview that he had after the Europa League game, and I was trying to find it while you were speaking that, but I couldn't quite find it in time. But he said a quote about, like, he felt that his performance, he added legs to the midfield, and he was basically hinted to the fact that we've lacked that for so long, and he himself was adding that. And it's getting to the point now where the players are coming out and saying how they feel like that we heard from ESPN's exclusive report that there was apparently a meeting between the coach and the players, and then after the coaches left, the players had their own impromptu meeting themselves, and there was raised voices and finger pointing, but it ended amicably was the quotes from it, and that's all great, and you want to hear that, but ultimately it only matters what happens on the pitch and the deliverance of those words that are spoken behind closed doors. But hearing Ainsley Maitland-Niles say those words, and then it always bleeds back into team selection, that he put in a really good performance, I thought, against Rapid. And he showed me that he had the capacity to play in the North London derby, especially as someone that's come through the Arsenal youth ranks, that if anyone else in the squad is going to understand the gravitas of that game, it would be someone like him. And yet he's not picked. The same with Joe Willock. Like, I felt he was put into the first team a little bit too late. He was having these really good games in the Europa League and wasn't put in after those good games in the Europa League. Like, the root from those good performances was not yet present, and I didn't feel that Arteta was rewarding it. And we go back to right at the start of the show, Johnny, when you were saying about Willian being picked over and over and over again, and nothing was changing despite these poor performances. And I think that eventually it gets to a point where the players will turn around and be like, what the hell? Like, I'm doing everything I can. I'm doing better than this guy that you keep picking every single week, and I'm getting no chance. Reece Nelson can't deliver a corner to save his life, but my God, the boy will run for 90 minutes and he'll do something in the game. And I felt he earned his place over Willian in the North London derby. I know that Willian might provide something extra defensively, tactically, but let's be honest, it was a tactical disaster on Sunday, so does it really matter? Anyway, let's push on with some more of the questions. French, have you got to go, or do you want to answer one more question?
I'll do this question.
You do this question. Here we go then. Brian Chiakpo says, are you guys surprised by this lack of creativity? We went from Ozil, Wilshere, Ramsey, Cazorla, Rosicky as a creative players to none since Ozil doesn't play. None of these guys were replaced.
I mean, yeah, this comes back to what I was saying in terms of, and what Drew was saying in terms of not having the players to not just even play the kind of football Arteta wants to play, but just play good football. It's really weird. It's honestly the horrendous mismanagement, and it's the kind of the story of Arsenal in a way, that the kind of mess ups we've had with contracts. I mean, Ozil still here but doesn't play because he's on a bumper contract. We can't get rid of him. Ramsey didn't give him a contract. Cazorla, well, that was a very sad way that ended, but it's true that we still didn't replace him. And yeah, it's something that we can't be surprised by, as the question asks. It's kind of the place that we are at now. These are the players that we have. If you look at the starting 11 that we had, for example, against Wolves, or against even, well, maybe not Villa because Partey was starting, but against Wolves, well, we have some of our best players, some of our biggest money that's gone into people like Ozil, Partey, and Pepe. They weren't available for a variety of reasons. And when you put that line up against Wolves' lineup, you think, is it really that? Is it much better? Is it better? It's not as huge a distinction as we want it to be, and we think it should be, and it should be realistically, because of this issue that we've gotten rid of these players and we've not replaced them, and it's a horrendous mismanagement. And now we've got this incredibly unbalanced squad, where we play football, there's just a big hole in the middle of the pitch, and the ball just can't seem to go there. And if it does go there, it just bounces right back. This point is, this is where we are. This is who we are. This is the team we are. I mean, we're not 50th, but we're also we're a long way off where we need to be. And I think that is something that's just going to take a window or two, to be perfectly honest. Whoever is in charge, I don't think any manager is going to come in and make this team where it needs to be with these players. Maybe they'll make them better than 15th, but then how long will that last? Because it seems to be a loop, as mentioned before. But yeah, I've got a dip with that. So thanks everyone for having me on, and everyone for listening as well.
No problem, mate. Do you want to tell people where they can find you?
Yeah.
Not physically, we always maintain, but just on your social media.
Yeah. On Twitter at FrenchSchooner23. Give us a follow.
Yes, enjoying French's handles of varieties going on every single week. So keep that up, mate, and we'll speak to you soon.
Nice one. Take care.
See you later, mate. Zip Dow has asked a question. Do you think that, all external issues and funding aside, Arteta is the manager you want to rebuild the club moving forward? Are you sure? I'm interested to get everyone's kind of thoughts on this, because I think there's kind of balls around the whole point of today's show in a way. It is a tough question, because Arsenal is so external and there's so many other factors that you have to consider. Let's just look at Arteta, and we're probably going to finish the show around this. Let's look at Arteta, the coach, and what he's done since coming in, because I guess the best barometer to look at Arteta as a coach is to look at what happened when he came in, when the only signings that were made were Cedric and Marie, who didn't play. So he had that squad. So we can kind of see what the impact was of just Arteta in that moment. You've also then got to take into account the fact that you just got rid of Emery, and then you've got that new manager bounce that we always talk about. So over that 6-month period, I saw improvement, as we kind of talked about, in the likes of Granit Xhaka, in the likes of Kieran Tierney, Maitland-Niles, and the system that we were playing, that we gradually got into that 3-4-3 system. Mustafi got better. I thought Bellerin improved, not necessarily that made him a good player, but he was playing better than he was under Emery. And I thought Aubameyang was obviously playing really well, scoring a lot of goals. He was actually going better than his XG suggested during that period as well. Pepe even looked good. If we were honest, Pepe had a decent season in the end. 18 goal contributions across everything. Was not too bad. And we kind of heard, and Drew doesn't really agree with me a lot on this point, but we heard about some of the stuff that he did with, say, Raheem Sterling and Leroy Sané at Manchester City. And there was hope that he could have an impact on some of those wingers. And I felt that there was a small impact that he had on Nicola Pepe. So if you just take that on its own, I think there is evidence there to suggest that Arteta is a good coach. Like, he can improve players. The issue that I think, and this is what I'm going to get one of you guys, either of you, to bounce off of, is that I think the club made a mistake in the summer by making Mikel Arteta the manager of the club. By making Mikel Arteta the manager, you suddenly took away what was a good coach away from what was just a head coach role, and you got him integrated into a system that was, let's face it, fracturing apart at the seams, with Raul Sanyehi being sacked, with 55 staff being made redundant, with Sasfami going, with Francis Cajagal going, with Gunnosaurus being sacked. Like, so many people went. and you made someone that has never had a senior experience of a first-team coach the manager of Arsenal Football Club. Now, that is where I think that we have to have a discussion around. And that's why, Zipdale, your question is very difficult to look at, because you've asked us to look at this without external factors. But I'm not sure that's possible. So if you do look at it without external factors, the only evidence we have, I think, is from those first few months that Arteta was in charge. And based on that, I would actually say to you that, yes, I do have the confidence that Arteta would be the guy to take us forward. But actually, when you put all of those external factors back in, that's where I start to question it. Johnny, you look like on the edge of your seat wanting to say something.
Do you know what? I think you, in your kind of speech there, really summed up the point where it all started going wrong. If you want to, hit your kind of axis, if you like. Yeah. Gunnersaurus gets sacked. We start losing week in, week out. You start to see who's important at this club. No, so... Look, this essentially has been the question I've been kind of throwing out quite a lot myself throughout this, because this is why I think it's an important question to be talking about right now, is because, as I mentioned earlier, this isn't about, obeying mob, looking for Arteta, get him out. This isn't about trying to make Arsenal into a revolving door of managers. It's an honest assessment of a manager who is in the job at the moment and is failing week in, week out, with no changes that are looking fruitful. No, there doesn't seem to be a plan there. And before, for what was my support for Arteta, it came from, like you said, towards the end of the season, the way that we were progressing, the way that he was getting the best out of certain players, and you had hope that, or I think I certainly did, but I think most people did, that we were playing in a restrictive way because we had to deal with the sum of our parts at that point and play to the squad's abilities. But there was going to be a corner that would get turned after a transfer window where he could start getting some of his own players in and get rid of some of the dross. Well, what have we seen? Because we can't just focus on one FA Cup, because the reality is there's some very good performances in there, but it's an FA Cup, like, we win them. We're the most successful team in the FA Cup. It happens, and I'm not taking away from that. But Roberto Di Matteo won the Champions League for Chelsea and got sacked. Okay, you can go if you're not getting it right. And the fact is what have we got as a kind of contributing evidence to take into account from that FA Cup point? He's been made manager. He's had a summer to sign players. Out of that, and I completely accept the input from other people with regards to the board's involvement in player allocation, and Edu for that matter. But Arteta has to take some responsibility with regards to this. He asked to sign Willian. Granted, I think Partey was a good deal, but it was quite clear that he wanted some creative options. Yeah. He wanted yeah, exactly. And we didn't end up with anyone. Now, if we don't end up with that player, and you think we're way short, you have to still, you might have to go and get someone you want slightly less. But if it's that much of a need, you have to address it. We sit here now where, for all of the talk about the players that you made better, you'd have to say at this moment in time, there are players being made worse under his tutelage. It's just as simple as that. Yeah. There are some people who've regressed so far over the last couple of months. You're like, for any of the good work Granit Xhaka did towards the end of last season, now he looks like he's in an absolute state again. And, if we got rid, it looks like a smart move. But ultimately, do we still believe in the vision that Arteta can pump through? And for me, I don't think that we are getting Pep Guardiola Mark II anymore. I don't think that that's even what he's flirting with. So... yes, he has the potential to deliver good performances and therefore, the opportunity to challenge for trophies. But ultimately, if you are a year into your job and you have just put together the worst run your club's had in 50 years, if you're not asking questions of this guy, I don't think you're paying attention. So for me, I'm not sure I do back him anymore. And... it's not like I hate him or anything. It's just mate, this is really, really alarming. You know what I mean? If we keep losing, he's going to have to go, and we're going to have to come in with someone who's got a right idea and a direction.
Yeah. Yeah. Drew, do you want to go for gold on your side of things?
Maybe silver, bronze. I don't know about gold, but
yeah.
Yeah, no, I kind of feel like
at this point.
Yeah, for me, I think where the club went wrong, I don't think it was wrong to appoint Arteta. I think they got the rest of the decisions wrong. So if you're going to appoint a young, inexperienced manager, you cannot appoint a young and inexperienced director of football. You can't put Edu in that position.
Yeah.
For me, you need someone who's going to give Arteta some guidance, who is going to take a lot of decisions away from him for squad building. It's a title: coach, manager, trainer, whatever you want to call it. As long as there's an established tiered system of how the club runs, and it maximizes the effectiveness of what Arteta can do, that's what matters. So you look at someone like Ralph Rangnick as an example. Would have been a really good director of football appointment for the club.
Very good.
Just as an example, I'm not saying we would have gotten him, but as an example, because he would have been someone who likes to promote youth from within, puts a lot of faith in younger players that have talent. He gives them chances. They think progressively. He likes progressive tactics. These are kind of things that you could have maybe tapped into someone who's more experienced. It's really hard to go and bring in someone who's so inexperienced as Arteta and then try to say we're building for the future, but it's hard to build for the future when you don't know how two very key components of the setup are going to get on in what is their first roles at this level, at a club that are massive, at the very least domestically. That, I think, is where the club went wrong. And while I know you're citing how Arteta improved players at City, Leroy Sané and Sterling, quoted him with helping parts of his game, that's only one aspect of being a manager. And right now it seems like he's struggling with all aspects when it's all encompassed. So for me, there should have been two routes to it. Either if you're going to appoint Arteta, which I backed, then you have to put a more experienced director of football in that role. Or at least at the very least, you need to make sure that it's not absolute bedlam at the levels above him, which it was, and that didn't really help. Or
Vinay is young as well. Vinay is inexperienced.
Vinay is young. Yeah, his rapid rise at the club is like, I don't even know how that happens. I don't know what dirt he's got. Like, really black and white photos in the vanilla folder, like under the table. Like, I've got these, like, so it's weird. So if you're going to appoint Arteta, you have to have an experienced head just above him to guide him, to take a lot of decisions away that aren't really up to him. You could say, these are the types of players I need. The director of football goes, okay, we'll find you those players. Don't worry about the names. We'll get you who you need based off of whatever factors we're going to look for. Or you bring in Arteta into a coaching role at the club as an assistant coach to a more experienced head with the agreed deal that in X amount of years, maybe you become the the manager in 2 or 3 years' time, or whatever it might be. That might not be what he wanted, but it's easier for him to do things like progress players like Leroy Sané and Raheem Sterling on an individual basis when his role at the club is drastically reduced, where he's just an assistant manager or he's just a coach, where he can focus on players individually more often than he can when he is actually a manager, where you have to worry about everything now, where he has a big say in the signings, where he's worrying about scouting, he's worried about all X, Y, and Z. It's very, very different from what he had at Man City. So it's almost like you're seeing two different Artetas. And I don't think that, I think we all kind of convinced ourselves that he was going to be Pep Mark II or Pep Mark 1.5 or whatever you want to call it.
0.000.
Right, whichever denomination you want to throw in there. But
yeah,
it's clear right on evidence right now that he's not, and that again, you kind of have to look at it with honest face value. Again, we're struggling in a way that is far below it's his first season in charge, give him time kind of thing. So we either have to make his job easier so he can go back to worrying about just the players, and maybe we'll have an uptick in performance. Or you have to say, maybe did we actually get this one wrong? Did we actually put faith in maybe someone that wasn't correct? I don't know yet. I'm not saying I want him gone, but I am saying I do think that even myself, now I'm just maybe a slight slightly concerned, and it's hard to deny that there are issues that the club has to resolve in rapid order, or else we're going to be in a bad fix in another month or two if nothing changes.
Yeah.
So.
And I think we've kind of summed it up between us really well, because I was happy for Arteta to take over when he did. I thought, well, Arsenal was at the rock bottom it could possibly be. What do I know? When Emery obviously left. And I thought Arsenal were kind of in a position where they could risk, you could take a risk on a young coach that has shown really good potential at Manchester City, and then things started to go okay. And then we won a bloody trophy, followed by the Holy Grail of the Community Shield, and then I genuinely drew, and I'm really glad that you talked about Edu like that, because I've never really looked at it in that way, because I kind of looked at Edu on the surface and thought, you know what, this guy's doing all right. Like, I've wanted Thomas Partey for so long. I've wanted Arsenal to sign a really class centre midfielder for so long, and I've wanted Arsenal to sign a really class centre back for so long. And Edu's done that. Edu did both of those things. But I hadn't really considered, I suppose, like the whole picture of what's going on beyond just Edu. And I kind of convinced myself in my monologue a few minutes before you both spoke in how Arteta being made manager, I look at that as such a huge mistake, and the faith that's been put in him. Like, you realistically, and you're thinking about any job, like the manager of a company, for instance, imagine like a company, a very, very well-known big company in any sort of field. You get this young guy and he does quite well in sort of general role, and then you suddenly make him a manager role. And above that young 38 to 40-year-old person that's now a manager, I think he's in his early 40s, that guy, above him is other people that are around his age, and all of the experienced guys have gone. The Arsene Wengers have gone. Like, everyone else is going. And the only persons with any experience are the guys that actually own the company, whose expertise are in a different sport and in a different game. And you put all of that together, and it is a recipe for disaster when you think about it. So this is why I'll always come back to the criticisms of Arteta. We can look at what he's doing on the pitch, and I think that's fair, and picking Willian and Xhaka over and over again. To abuse the guy, I think, is going way too far. And I think that I don't necessarily even look at him and say that, like, what is going on now is all Arteta's fault. Like, and by sacking Arteta, suddenly all of our problems will solve. By bringing in an Allegri, by bringing in someone like that, suddenly all of it, because you could bring in an Allegri and you could bring in a Pochettino, which I don't think would ever happen. But because we don't have the structure above it, it doesn't matter who we bring in. I just don't see things improving.
I'm not sure I agree. Now,
who comes in then with what we've got? And how does it change?
So, for instance, if you look at, I'm going to throw some names out here. You know, sometimes they can be disasters. I once mentioned Owen Coyle's name, and it gets brought up.
Who perked up there for a second? I saw his eyes go around the room.
Is Coyle available? Who knows? But look, for me, Ralph Hasenhüttl at Southampton's done a wonderful job, and what you could almost say is, realistically, Southampton don't get it wrong very often. And if you look at a team who are repeatedly getting it right and you keep getting it wrong and you're better than them, just nick what they do. That's what Liverpool did. That's one of the reasons Liverpool were there. They basically go, oh, right, they've signed all these good players. Let's take them onto the next level, and we know Pochettino went to Tottenham, done a wonderful job there as well. Southampton have hired pretty much about a 90% hit rate on their coaches in recent times. And, Southampton look really good in terms of performing against what you might expect of them. Apart from that, you can, there are other options. I know that, the kind of the fan in me would always entertain the idea of Vieira, although I think that his managerial career up to now hasn't been the most inspiring. But on the same note, one of the things I said with regards to Arteta was, at least Vieira's actually been a manager, so he's had some ups and downs, and you'd think that he might have some experience of how to navigate those things. But it was never about Arteta's ceiling. It was about his floor, because the fact is when you have an unknown quantity like that, we were all getting starry-eyed at how good we could be. Like, look, we're going to be better than City with a steal to us. but we didn't think if it starts going wrong, and like Drew brought up, and you said, Tom, the lack of experience in terms of the structure, this could spiral very quickly. And has Arteta got the the wherewithal to be able to say, no, hold up, it's my job on the line if this goes wrong. This is how we're going to do it. This is how we're going to do it. Because for me, it seems like one of the points where he's done that is we don't know what happened with Ozil, but again, someone like in terms of signing Willian, that was his signing. Yeah, you know, we've got evidence over the kinds of, you know, for me, the Saliba thing, it's like, if you're meant to be a wicked coach, I've seen this guy, like, don't get me wrong, like, you know, I don't get to watch Saliba all the time, but I've seen bits from him, highlights even for Arsenal. He's a good prospect. There's no reason why a guy like that, he can't be worse than some of the geezers getting chances out there. He can't be. So it's weird stuff with Arteta, and for me, it seems a little bit like he's spooked because he's dealing with a situation he's never had to deal with before, and that's concerning.
It's not just that, but it's the gravity of it, and Jesus Christ, like, I can't tell you how many times I have to have Julian Nagelsmann discussions with people on a daily basis. Yeah. But the difference there is that he's being so successful at Leipzig now is because he spent time at a considerably smaller club with smaller ambitions at Hoffenheim, and he also spent a lot of time managing at youth level. So he knew what it was like to be an actual manager, despite the level, if it was under 17s, under 18s, under 19s, you know, an assistant manager, and then a manager for a much smaller club. And now RB will have ambitions on winning Bundesliga, on playing quite well in Europe, and they want to go on and win the league. So he's gone up to tiers. Arteta was immediately, he went from a player to an assistant manager to under the tutelage of a manager who is unique, we'll call it. And then now he's taken his first job as a massive first job. It's rare that managers have their first job at massive first jobs. Pep's one of the prime examples where he went right from Barca B one season, went to
kind of different though, isn't it?
It is. It's a lot different.
Derby first, like
right, exactly. Derby, and in fairness, he wasn't exactly, you know, brilliant at Derby. He did fine, but at least he cut his teeth at a lower level. Arteta didn't. His first job is, you know, as we've discussed, the third biggest club in England, and one of the, you know, top 10 or 15 biggest clubs in Europe, if not globally.
In the Premier League.
Right. That's a huge. That's a huge asking of a young manager, and it could easily simply be something as simple as the scope is catching up with him about what this task actually really is. And also, people forget how many years Arsene Wenger managed before he came to Arsenal. You know, he was in France for a while. He went to Japan, and then he finally came here. And he was still an unknown quantity, but he still had years of managerial experience under his belt. So, yeah, it's a tough one, but I do think the balance of the fans still want to back him. I think that's the correct decision. But again,
it's tipping.
You do have to. There's a line that will have to be drawn. Where you set your line is up to you. You know. But yeah,
I think it's a real shame. Like I genuinely, because and going back to, I suppose, Zipdale's question right at the start when he asked us to kind of look at Arteta without all of the external factors, we go back to that point of I genuinely think there was a really, really quality, like such a high potential coach within him, and I think that maybe being thrown into this scenario is becoming a very big problem. And obviously the melting pot is going to be over the next couple of games against Burnley and Southampton. If in those games Arsenal failed to score, it will only convince more and more people that this is not going to work. And we won't get to January. Well, in my mind, I think we will. I think the club is going to continue to stick with him, to be honest, whatever. But in terms of the fan base, I don't think we're going to get to January if we still continue to drop points against Southampton and against Burnley.
If you think about it, we're going into a Southampton match where we are comfortably the underdog against Southampton.
Yeah, that's mad, isn't it? That's crazy.
And I know some absolutely brilliant Southampton fans. You know, shout out to my friend Ross, who's one of them. But that's the reality is we're now currently on form levels below.
Confident going against
Southampton and even Burnley.
Theo Walcott licking his lips.
Oh, he's gonna love it.
Could you imagine?
Absolutely love it.
Could you imagine?
Carl Walker Peters, like former Spurs, is gonna be going at it. Walcott down that side as well. Oh god.
Yeah, it's tough, and like even if, and I think you can maybe say like on form, if we lost to Saints, you could say I don't expect to lose, but on form you have to say if we lost, we probably wouldn't be shocked. But if we didn't get 3 points against Burnley, I think you're going to see a lot more fans become more staunch in their voices of something's got to change, because I mean, Burnley have been diabolical. We haven't been obviously much better, of course, overall in the balance of it, but our defensive record's not that much better than Burnley's, to be fair. And we're not scoring goals. That's the problem. So you could see a 0-0 draw against Burnley, and you'd have to shake your head and say, "Well, I'm packing it in, and I'll see you guys in the summer." You know what I mean? Yeah. And I could understand if fans got that frustrated. So, yeah, yeah.
I think if we lose the next 2 games and we don't score goals, he has to go. There is,
even if it's 0-0.
I already think there's an argument for me. It's not like get him out, but I think though I don't give them the credit that they're actually doing this, I think the board should be looking at his position now. You know, they should be assessing what options there would be if they were to replace the manager. You know, because I mean, it's not going to be a gravy train if it was, but we have to be looking at it, because if we, like you said, it's the lack of goals. You can't go into games if you can't score goals. And if we get beat by Southampton and Burnley, then we're following it up with like Chelsea, City games after that. We could get, you know, we can't risk that, and we would have to. You have to then say away with, you know, any long-term plan, and we've got to deal with the fire in the room, you know. So yeah, it's tough times.
Really
yeah,
tough.
And then one last bit of awesome positivity.
Oh, God, here we go.
The only teams that have scored fewer goals than us in the league this season are the teams that are currently all in relegation
zone. Yeah,
Yep.
Yeah, and that is the biggest telling sign right now. That is it. Thank you, everyone in the chat box this evening. There's been some absolutely brilliant comments, and really, really good questions as well in the questions section too, which obviously got us talking a lot. We don't usually go on for an hour and a half on a podcast, but I think it probably earned it today, in fairness. Now, I have got one more question for you guys, and this is horrible. We do this at the end of every single show, and I do have to ask a prediction for the next Premier League game. Do not emphasise it. Do not elaborate. I just want a scoreline because we need to wrap things up. So, Johnny, Arsenal, Burnley, what do you think?
1-1.
1-1. We scored. Progress.
Yeah.
I'm loving it.
Penalty, probably.
Yeah, penalty. Header from a corner. That's what it's going to be. Pablo Mari up at the top.
I'm gonna go 2-0 Arsenal, because if not, I'm gonna set my building on fire. That's kind of
just burning hope. A says 0-0. Joseph says 1-0 Burnley. Yonick Max says 2-1 Burnley. Danny says 6-0. But I mean, are we away to Burnley or are we at home?
No, we're home.
We're at home. Okay, so that's 6-0 to us, which is positive. Javier says 1-1. Slavomir says, lucky if we get 0-0. Brian Robles says 1-0 to the Arsenal. Zipdale says 1-0 Burnley. Ibrahim says 1-1. Bulgarian Greener says 5-0. Easy. Don't know what you're eating, mate, but I want some. But yeah, I'm seeing some more coming now. Genuinely, thank you so much. It's been one of, even though it was after a North London derby in which we were easily beaten, this has been one of the most enjoyable podcasts to sit down and chat and break everything down analytically. And it's been education for myself. I've been asking people for weeks to try and convince me and tell me if Arteta is to go, who is the person that comes in. Johnny, I think you've come out of the closest I've come to being convinced by another manager in Ralph Hasenhüttl. Genuinely, I look at that option as something that the club should do. Premier League experience. Has already done it in other countries as well. I think it's a genuine, and I think also that he gets the best from the squad that he's got at Southampton, and they've made some sensible additions too. So
I'd co-sign that, by the way.
Yeah, I don't think he would necessarily need like the experience above him as well.
No.
So it would be interesting to see how that one would work out. But that is a completely side thing. Arteta is still here. He still has 100% of my backing whilst he's the manager, and I will continue to support him all the time. he needs to turn things around. That is the most blatant thing. We need to be scoring goals. And I really, really hope that he does that. I really, really genuinely hope that we turn things around because we need it to. Otherwise, by Christmas, we could be seeing some Arsenal relegation T-shirts coming out of you-know-where. So thank you so much. Drew, thank you for your time, mate. Do you want to tell people where they can find you on your socials?
As usual, you can always find me at FMLera on Twitter. That's it.
That's it. Awesome. Johnny?
I'm at LA Johnny Cochran. I'm also at HYF podcast, which is my fatherhood podcast that I plugged last time, and I will again. It's if you are done with football right now, which I could understand why you would be, and you're a father or have a father, which is pretty much most. Well, it's everyone, isn't it? Really. So, basically, it's about that. It's kind of chats about fatherhood, all aspects of it. So if you want to come over at HYF podcast, or in terms of listening to it, it's anywhere you listen to podcasts.
There you go. Johnny's had some really fantastic guests on. You should definitely check it out, and he's not so bad himself, so please make sure you do check out the show. But I'm sure you'll see Johnny back on the show very soon again, I'm sure. And you can find us at the Gooner Talk TV. You can follow my actual personal account, which I've reopened since going into full-time writing, which is at Tom Canton Media, so give us a follow over there. And please check out all of the writing that I'm doing over at 101 Great Goals. There's been some interesting stuff going on with regards to Arsenal, and of course some really interesting. I wrote a piece about Troy Deeney and the racist abuse that he's received over the last couple of days, which is sickening, and in combination with what's going on at Millwall and Colchester and the booing as well. So there's been a few pieces written about that, so please make sure you read that. And yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you and host the show, as it always is. We'll see you again very soon. Make sure you drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you're new around here. I'm going to stop sounding like a train station tannoy any second now. But we'll see you again soon, and as always, up the Arsenal.